Awesome. Hi everyone. People are kind of starting to trickle in. So I'm going to give it like 1 or 2 minutes before I go ahead and get started on the actual PowerPoint. So I'll probably start at around like 2:01, 2:02 time frame. And then we can kind of go from there. For those of you who just joined, I'm gonna give like 1 more minute to kind of let some people trickle in before we go ahead and start the PowerPoint. So like I said, I'm gonna start at like 2:02-ish time frame and get started on the PowerPoint then. Okay. Looks like don't have any more people joining right now, but if they do, I'm just gonna go through an overview slide anyway. So really no worries about that. So I'm going to go ahead and get the PowerPoint set up and then we can go ahead and get started. Also, I hope everyone can hear me okay. I was having microphone issues earlier this morning. So I don't know if I like cut out a bunch or something. Please let me know in the chat. And I can just take my microphone off and kind of do this a different way. Okay. Awesome. Hello, everyone. My name is Kai, and welcome to the Statistics Solutions webinar on APA editing, how to avoid the most common mistakes. So this webinar will be recorded so that you can watch it back. But if along the way, if you have any questions throughout the PowerPoint, there should be a Q&A section in Zoom, / you could also just use the chat. And you can just ask any questions that you may have. I have a Q&A section kind of at the end of this PowerPoint for those questions and stuff like that. So I will get to them towards the end of the PowerPoint. So if anything does come up, just go ahead and write it down and send it over, and I'll get that kind of answered for you later. Awesome. Also, stick around towards the end of the PowerPoint, not only for the Q&A, but also for some more information on how Statistics Solutions, us as a company, can help you with APA editing or really any part of your dissertation process. So like I said, stick around towards the end. I have some information on who to contact and kind of what our services entail. I also do have an email right here as well. This is the email to my boss, Janine. She's my sales manager. She's awesome. But like I said, I have more information towards the end of the PowerPoint. I just wanted to put her email up on the screen as well. Awesome. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So like I said, this PowerPoint is about APA editing. We're going to talk about kind of the two main things or aspects of APA, which is grammar and style and references. And then afterwards, we're going to talk a little bit about the 7th edition, which is the newest edition of APA. I think it came out in 2018, maybe 2019. So fairly recent in terms of the changes that have been made. Awesome. So first things first, APA is the American Psychological Association's rules and regulations for writing research. Like I said in the last slide, it contains two main parts or aspects. The first is grammar and style, and the second is references. So today we're going to start with grammar and style, and have a couple slides on that, and then I have a couple slides on references, and then so on and so forth. So starting with grammar. Sorry, give me 1 second. I'm going to drink some water and then I'll go ahead and get started. Okay, sorry about that. Just feel a little something in my throat. Maybe it's just like a bug or something. Oh well. Okay. So first thing to keep in mind when writing an APA style is your writing voice. So APA style prefers the use of an active voice or a structure in which the subject performs the action rather than a passive voice. And so a passive voice is a structure in which the action is not really clear. A good example of this is by using the researcher as the subject of the sentence and the action rather than stating that the study was conducted. Conducted by who, right? That, you know, we want to be very specific about who we're talking about and what we're talking about when it comes to research. So, you know, this usually starts appearing in chapter 3, when you start referencing your own study. You know, people like to avoid the use of, you know, I statements or me statements. And so a lot of the times they will default to a passive sentence structure rather than kind of switching it around and changing it from I conducted the study to the researcher conducted the study. So it can be really easy to kind of fall back onto a passive voice when you're trying to avoid using I statements. But we want to avoid that as much as possible. There are some exceptions to this rule though, as in chapter 4, as well as parts of chapter 3, where the emphasis is placed not on the researcher, but the participants. So instead of saying, you know, the researcher will do such and such, you say something along the lines of like, you know, the participants will be asked to do this, or something like that, rather than, you know, saying the study will have the participants do this, you know, that's a little bit more passive than it is active. But fixing passive sentences is super easy. Really, the only thing you have to do is include the doer of the action in the sentence. So like I said, just avoid kind of talking about the study being the doer, because the study is not the doer. You are the doer, or the other researchers that you're talking about are the doers. And then again, in chapters 3 and 4 specifically, the participants are the doers. Okay. And this slide kind of, you know, I lost my train of thought there. But this slide really transitions well into the next slide that we're going to talk about. That's what I wanted to say, transitions. And so the next thing that I want to talk about with grammar and style is anthropomorphism. And specifically, we want to avoid anthropomorphism. And so this kind of goes back to the active versus passive voice. So, you know, anthropomorphism is the act of attributing characteristics to inanimate, oh my goodness, I can't speak today, I'm sorry, inanimate objects and ideas. And so passive voice ends up also anthropomorphizing things as well. And so not only do we not want to have a passive voice, but we also don't want to make it seem as though the study is the one who is doing this. Like, we don't want to anthropomorphize the study because the study is not a real person. They're not in the room with us right now. No, I'm kidding. But you know, the study didn't do anything. You did something, or the you know, the previous researchers did something. This can also, though, be, you know, attributed to when you're talking about previous literature. You want to avoid saying things such as like the article discussed this topic and this topic, and instead focus on the people who wrote the article, because again, the article itself didn't discuss anything. You know, Smith 2004 discussed these topics and these concepts within the article. And so it really is just about making sure that, we're sticking to that active voice, and we're avoiding, acting as if the study or, an article has done something, because ultimately it hasn't. Okay. So, afterwards, tense is another very important aspect of APA writing. And this is because certain tenses are appropriate at different times within your study. So in general, in the proposal stage, you will refer to your study in the present and the future tense. And this is because you have yet to conduct your study, but you will soon. So you're talking about it in the present, as in this is what I'm doing right now. And in the future, as in specifically like your methodology, where in the proposal stage, you're going to be talking about, the purpose of this study is to blank, to accomplish this, we will do this, or the participants will be asked to do this. So this is all in the future tense, because this is, it has not been approved. We have not conducted it. We are listing out what the participants will do when we're actually conducting this study. However, once your proposal is approved, the study is then going to be written in past tense to denote that you have already conducted the study and that this is what was done. This does include the writing of the results. And so, afterwards, you would go through kind of your first 3 chapters after your proposal has been approved. And you're going to change all of your present and future tense to past tense. So that's going to be something along the lines of, the purpose of the study was to, participants were asked to do this. The researcher found that, this, rather than something along the lines of like the researcher will find. And so, it's really about denoting that whether or not you have or have not conducted your study yet. And however, the only exception to this is that you are always going to use past tense when referring to what other researchers did or found. And that is because, like I was saying earlier, it's about denoting whether or not this study has been conducted. So if you're talking about a published paper that has already been published, it has already been done, it has already been conducted, chances are, most published studies, it takes about at least a year, if not more, to actually get that publishing thing to happen and to actually get it out into the world. And so, 99% of the time, chances are when you're writing about stuff that other researchers have done, it's going to be in the past tense because it's denoting that they have already done this thing. So that is the only time in your proposal stage and after your proposal stage that past tense is going to be used throughout, is talking about what other researchers did. So that's going to be pretty heavy in like your chapter 2, your literature review. So even though while you're going to talk about your current study in the future tense, any past studies are going to be talked about in the past tense. Oops. Wait, I skipped one. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. So next is capitalization. So there are important distinctions on when to use and when not to use capitalization in APA style. So capitalization should be used on all major titles. Sorry, I'm gonna just state that. Capitalization should be used on all major words in titles and headings. So if, the title of your paper is Living with Your Eyes Open, then Living with Your Eyes and Open, all of those are going to have capital letters at the beginning of them. Additionally, journal titles and reference titles should also be capitalized. So, if you're using a journal, I'm not good at coming up with fake names for journals, but say it was like statistics journal. I don't know, guys. I'm bad at this, but I'm bad at being creative. And so, then statistics and journals is going to be capitalized. And then, references to titles and sections within the actual article or document. So literature review, methodology, introduction, results, all of those are going to be capitalized as well. Finally, any instrumentation, tests, surveys should be capitalized as well. So something along the lines of the Minnesota multi-factor personality inventory. This is the name of a test or a questionnaire of some kind. Same with like the multi-factor leadership questionnaire. That's a questionnaire. So if those are validated questionnaires, tests, inventories, stuff like that, they should be capitalized. However, theory names, so say, the misinformation effect is a theory that we have in psychology specifically, that would not be capitalized because it's talking about the theory rather than the actual test of how to do it. And then finally, I skipped over this section, but proper nouns, adjectives, and nouns used as proper nouns, those are always going to be capitalized. So if we're talking about people's names, if we're talking about a building or an organization, those are always going to be capitalized. And then finally, any nouns that are followed by a numeral or a letter. So if we're talking about like research question 1, research and question are going to be capitalized. And then, or like participant 55, then participant is going to be capitalized. I'm going to leave this screen on just for 1 second because I know it's a lot of information on when to capitalize things. The next slide is kind of when not to capitalize things. So I'll leave this on for a second. Just a reminder, this is when to capitalize. Next slide is when not to capitalize. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and move the slide. But if anyone, even at the end, if you guys want, more slide references, you want me to go back to things so you can write things down, I will absolutely do that. And additionally, like I said earlier, this call is being recorded and you will have access to the recording within about 24 to 48 hours after it has, downloaded onto the cloud or wherever the heck it downloads. And so if you do need to go back to these slides or any other slides to review the information that was presented, you will have access to do that in about 24 to 48 hours after this webinar is over. Okay. So next is when not to capitalize. So when we are not capitalizing is when we are referencing titles of books or articles. So we're only going to capitalize the first word. And then after, any proper nouns is also going to be capitalized. So here's an example here. We've got Henderson and this name that I'm not even going to try to pronounce, 1993. And so you can see just the first word, strategic, and then alignment. Afterwards is not capitalized. But then, we've got a little colon or, after a colon, after a dash, after a semicolon. In this case, we have a colon. Then the first word after the colon is also going to be capitalized and everything else is not going to be capitalized. Anyway, or also, sorry, when we are talking about names, laws, theories, models, or statistical procedures, we are not going to capitalize. So this is like what I was talking about earlier, where we would capitalize, the Minnesota questionnaire, but we're not going to capitalize the misinformation effect. So this could also, be along the lines of, cognitive behavioral therapy. This is a procedure or a theory that people use in therapy and stuff like that. We're not going to capitalize that, right? And then finally, any shortened, inexact, or generic titles of a test, you're not going to capitalize. So say you're using a stress test, but you don't want to say the name of the stress test every single time. The word stress test is a generic title of a test, and so therefore it's not going to it's not going to be capitalized. However, if you were using the specific title of the test, that's when you're gonna capitalize it. Okay. Next is abbreviations and acronyms. So how and when to use them. So abbreviations should be used if if a certain title is mentioned more than 4 times in a paper. So 3 or more times. 4 or more times. And so less than 3 times, it should be written out every single time. And so that could be something along the lines of, say we're talking about the CDC, right? Which is the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. And so if we're only talking about the CDC a couple times, like once or twice, every time you mention it, you're just going to say, and the Center for Disease Control and Prevention says this or states this or whatever the heck you want to talk about it. However, if, your entire paper revolves around the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, and you're going to be talking about it more than once, or more than 4 times specifically, you have to basically, write out the words first, at least 1 time. And then afterwards, you can use the acronym afterwards. So, something along the lines of, the Center for Disease the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, blah, 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 blah. The CDC says this, and then so on and so forth. So, once you have kind of written out and defined the acronym or the abbreviation, then you can just completely kind of ignore what it actually means and just use the acronym and the abbreviation from then on. So like I said, you just have to define it. Abbreviations can also be helpful when saving space in your paper, but like I said, you have to make sure that the reader understands what the abbreviation or the acronym actually stands for. So it must be clearly defined in your paper at least once. And then last thing is, something like the United States versus the US. So per APA style, we only use the abbreviations of the US when it's in adjective form. So like if you're saying the US Navy or the US Treasury Department. However, if you're actually talking about the United States as a noun, you're going to actually say the United States rather than the US. And that's kind of the exception to the rule, just because that's where we live. Well, most of us, at least. I don't actually know. I shouldn't make that assumption. Okay. Oh, I skipped another thing. God dang it, guys. Okay, sorry. So last important aspect of grammar and style is the usage of numbers in APA format. So according to the APA rules, you can use numerals when the number is over 10, or if it represents a time, date, or score. So by numerals, I mean the actual numbers, like 10, 15, 20, 25, for 25, 35, so on and so forth. So anything over 10, or if it's denoting time, date, or score, you're going to use the numerals. And you're always going to use numerals in the abstract, which is the beginning of your paper, like a little paragraph or 1 page kind of describing the entirety of your study. You're just always going to use numerals, and that's for saving space sake, because an abstract is supposed to be short, small, easy to read. And so something if it's like 2 years old or 5 years old or item 1, or if you're talking about $5, even though those are under 10, because they're denoting time, date, age, scores, money, that means that you're going to use the numerals rather than spelling it out. And then if that is not the case, if the number is 9 or less, and it does not denote time, date, score, etc., you're going to spell it out. Additionally, you're going to spell it out any number that begins a sentence title or text heading. So if you start your paragraph by saying, 2 participants did this, it's going to be TWO, even if that is 10 participants. That number is over 10. However, it's starting at the beginning of a sentence. So you're not going to start by saying 10 participants. You're going to say 10 TEN. If it's common fractions like 1/3, 1/4, something like that, those are often just spelled out rather than using like the 1-4 or the 1-3, just because that can get confusing in a reading section when you're reading it. And then finally, just universally accepted usages of words. We're gonna want to spell those out. Okay. So that's kind of all I had on grammar and style. If you guys do have any questions throughout, please put them in the chat. Like I said, I have I have a Q&A section kind of at the end for this. But the next biggest part of APA is citations and references. And this is where I think a lot of people really struggle with APA formatting, because the grammar and the style stuff, it's very nitpicky, but it's very usually easy to look up and figure out. But citations and references, I think, is where a lot of people trip up. So it is important when discussing other people's ideas and work that we do not plagiarize. So instead, we should always be attempting to put the author's ideas into your own words, with what is known as paraphrasing. And so a big tip that I always give people is that when you're taking notes on a research paper, never take those notes directly from the text. So if you're on your computer, don't just highlight, copy, and paste and go. Instead, you want to, write those notes in your own words so that you're better able to understand the material, since you've actually encoded it in your own words, but also you're less likely to plagiarize that way. And so that's, I used to teach as a TA when I was in grad school, and this is what I told every single one of my students, is that, we always want to paraphrase. We don't want to kind of copy and paste from the articles. And then the biggest way to avoid plagiarism, though, is to always cite your sources. And even though this seems like kind of a common piece of knowledge, chances are it's not. So like, even if you're saying something along the lines of like, the sky is blue, if that's like a big part of your paper, you should probably cite people who are agreeing that the sky is blue. So even if it seems like common knowledge, chances are it's really not, and you should be citing where you learned that information from. And so using proper citations, it not only, helps you from plagiarizing, but it does strengthen your credibility as a researcher, because it's showing that you are using other examples, and able to kind of encode that into your own words and incorporate that into your own research. And so because we are citing all of our sources of information, we are going to need a reference list. So a reference list goes at the end of your paper, and it lists out each of the authors, titles, dates, published for the articles within your paper. This list should be in alphabetical order, and it should match up with all of the articles in your text. And so if you have online sources, you must include some sort of retrieval information, whether or not that's a DOI, or if it's just the actual website link, or HHTP ... whatever the heck the rest of the website link is. And if you're using DOI, There's like a new rule with APA 7th edition that in APA 6th edition, you used to say like retrieved from, and then you would put the DOI. Now we don't say retrieved from. Instead, right at the end of your reference, you're just gonna include the DOI or just include the website link. Did I skip anything? Okay, sorry. Okay. And so as well as having like a full reference list at the end, APA also requires that you cite your sources within the text as well. And so there are two ways to do this. One is the reference as the subject of the sentence. So that would be something along the lines of Smith et al. 2012 found that the misinformation effect was stronger when people are stressed. I don't know if that's true. Well, I do. That was what my thesis was on, but not the point. Or you could do the reference at the end of the sentence in parentheses. So instead, you would say something along the lines of, the researchers found that the misinformation effect was stronger when people were more stressed, parentheses, Smith et al., year, parentheses. And so both ways are super valid. I personally kind of like to mix both of those in within my paper. So if I've found myself using the reference as the subject a lot, I'll switch it up and I'll put it at the end of the sentence as well. So it really just depends on your preference and your writing style. And then any sources of information that you have in your text must also be found in the full references section at the end. But ultimately with in-text citation, it's always going to be the first author's last name and then et al. If it's more than 3 people, and then the date published. So if it's 2 people, if it's less than 3 people, so say it's like Smith and Downey or something like that, you would literally just write Smith and Downey 2012. But if it's, Smith and Downey and Roberto and whatever the heck other names, and it's like 50 names, you're going to say Smith et al. You're not going to list all of those names. Okay. Awesome. So that's kind of, just the basics of references. Now we're going to go into kind of the specifics of APA 7th edition, the writing and formatting rules. So first thing I wanted to talk about is the level headings. So in APA 7th edition, we have 5 headings. I guess there are more technically. I think it goes up to 7. But really the first 5 are the ones that we use the most. Level 1 headings are going to be centered in the middle of your screen. They're going to be boldface and title case heading. Your text is also then going to begin as a new paragraph. So after you write methodology in the center of your paper, bolded, you're going to press enter, then you're going to press tab, and then you're going to start a new paragraph. So that's your level 1. So that's stuff like introduction, methodology, literature review, results, discussion. So kind of the beginning, the title heads of your papers, right? Level 2 is going to be, something along the lines of the participant section within your results section. So this is going to be flush left. It's going to be bold-faced, and it's also going to be in title case heading. And just like in level 1, our text is beginning as a new paragraph. This might seem a little confusing, but there are really awesome websites like Purdue Owl. I hope I said that correctly. Purdue Owl. I'm not sure how to say it. But their website is awesome, and they have tons of great examples about this kind of stuff, especially with the level headers. I even still get, not confused, but tripped up by the level headers sometimes. And so, I love using that as a reference. And I also use my APA manual as a reference all the time. I'm going to get into that a little bit later, though. Level 3 is very similar to level 2, except for this time we're going to italicize our flush left headings. And so in this case, that would be something along the lines of, if under your participant section, you're listing the sample size, sample size is going to be a level 3 heading where it's going to be flush left, bold italics, and then right underneath your text is going to start as a new paragraph. From there, the only real differences are, bold versus not bold and indented. So everything after level 3 is going to be indented, and then the paragraph is actually going to continue on the same line. So you're not going to press enter, tab, and start a new paragraph. Instead, you'd write something along the lines of, I don't know, say sample size is your level 4 heading in this case. Sample size is going to be indented, it's going to be bolded, it's going to end with a period, and then right after the period, you're going to just keep writing your text. Same with level 5, except for those are italicized. And these really do go in order of kind of like when you use them, and it's kind of intuitive on when to use what. There's not really set hard and fast rules for which ones to use when. Really the only hard and fast rule is that like the level 1s are going to be, stuff like your introduction or, your literature review, your methodology, your results, stuff like that. The chapter heads is really the hard and fast rule that you have to stick through. And then from there, as long as you're kind of following basic APA rules, as long as your headings make sense to you basically and to your reader, then you're pretty good. Awesome. So one big thing that APA 7th edition kind of changed from the 6th edition is a couple things of grammar and style and bias-free language. So specifically, APA does recognize the singular they if the gender is like of your participants is unknown, or if it's irrelevant, or if it's someone who uses they as their personal pronouns. Additionally, APA wants you to use person first language. And so you're going to say something along the lines of, a man with epilepsy rather than an epileptic man. That's because we want to put their personhood before their, in this case, epilepsy is like a disability, or, their condition. You want to put their personhood before their condition. And so, like if poor is the condition, then we don't want to talk about poor people. We want to talk about, people living in poverty, we want to put their personhoods first. Also, you want to be really specific. So, when it needs to be. So if we're talking about Americans, are we talking about Korean Americans? Are we talking about Asian Americans? Are we talking about African Americans? If we're talking about men, are we talking about cisgender men or just men in general? Or are we specifically talking about trans and non-binary men? So it really just depends. And you want to be specific based on, that person first language. Awesome. So tables and figures, they didn't really change much between APA 7th and 6th edition, but I did really want to get into them because I think this is another section that people can get really tripped up on. And so tables and figures are always going to be formatted in parallel. And so what that means is that, they're all going to follow this same format that kind of goes down. You'll see what I see in a second. I have an example on the next slide. But really, so the first thing is going to be kind of what is the table number or the figure number. That's going to be bolded, and that's going to be at the top. So if you can see here, it says like table 1/figure 1. Next is going to be your title of the actual table or the figure. Usually it's used to describe what is in, what is in the table or figure, and that's going to be italicized. So in this case, it says participant demographics, but in other cases, it could be, regression results for X predicting Y, something like that, right? From then, you're going to have the heading, which is your top columns. So your heading is going to be, the column headers. So, column 1 could be participant number, column 2 could be means, or column 1 could be means, column 2 could be standard deviation. But basically at these headings, at the top of the columns, you're going to title, what's going to be underneath. And then finally the body. So the body is going to be, the actual numbers, the actual figure itself, what is underneath all of these columns. And I have an example on the next page. So tables of figures continued. This is the example of kind of what I'm talking about right here. So here we have our number. It's bold, table 2. Right underneath, we have results of curve fitting analysis examining time course fixations to the target. Sounds super fancy. And that's italicized. From there, we have our headers. So logistic parameters, 9-year-olds mean standard deviations, 16-year-olds mean standard deviations. So these are the heads of the columns describing what the columns or the rows underneath are basically saying. And then from there, you have the body of your actual table here. And so APA wants you to limit the use of your borders for clarity. And so in APA, we actually don't use vertical borders at all. Basically just get those out of there. It really mucks up the results in terms of readability. And APA just kind of argues that this way here, exactly what this example looks like, is kind of the most easily readable version of a table that you could put in APA format. And then finally, you can be placing these within the text or within the actual appendix section of your paper. It doesn't really matter which one. It really depends to you and how big your table is. And if it's taking up too much space, a lot of people will put it in the appendix section because it's like a huge table or something. But as long as you're just referencing that table, see table 2 for the results of the curve fitting analysis, or see appendix 5 for table 2 results, something like that, right? Or, well, it would be appendix A, B, C, D, not 5, but you get what I'm saying. Hopefully. Okay. And then I just wanted to talk a little bit more about in-text citations in terms of 7th edition. And so, like I said a little bit earlier, all sources with 3 or more authors, you're going to use the author's first name, and then you're gonna, or the author's first author's last name, not their first name, sorry. And then you're gonna use et al afterwards. So if it was like something like, Smith and Rodrigo and, whatever, I'm not good at coming up with last names. And you've got 3 or more people, you're always going to say like Smith et al 2012, Rodrigo et al 2014, something like that, right? The only exception to this is if you have 2 papers that have the same first listed author with the same name and like the same date, right? So like say, John Smith was like really active in research that year and he put out 2 different papers where he was the first author in 2012. Well, then you're comparing Smith et al 2012 and Smith et al 2012. And so therefore that's the only exception that you're going to make with adding more than one author's last name. And so if that's the case, you're just going to put the first 2 authors' last names, and then the date 2012, and then so on and so forth. The reference section, just a little bit different than this. So the reference section is, again, kind of that big one at the end. You're going to include all of the authors in a reference section up to 20 in your reference section. And so the only case that you're going to be using et al in a reference section is if you have like 21 different authors on a paper, which, while surprising, does happen. So, to save yourself from writing 20 different names or 21 different names, that's the only time that you can use et al in a reference section. In the full references at the end. Like I said earlier, DOIs and URLs are both going to be presented in hyperlink for electronic sources so that you're able to click on it and be able to immediately be taken to the article in question. Okay. And then just some helpful tips kind of like at the end, keep up with this formatting from the very beginning. It's way easier to deal with it when you're kind of working with it from the start than at the very end when you're ready to defend, you're ready to be done. And now you're realizing, oh crap, I have all of this APA stuff that I have to do and I have to go back in my paper and change everything. So ultimately it's way easier to start at the beginning and really just hone in on those APA rules like from the very beginning rather than trying to fix them retroactively at the end. Additionally, keep a running list of references and check regularly against your in-text citations. This was a big thing for me when I was doing my master's thesis a couple years ago. I just was so unorganized when it came to my references. And when it came to time to defend, there were several in-text citations that I had mentioned within the text that I didn't actually reference in the reference section at the end, and kind of vice versa, right? I had references at the end that were never mentioned inside the text. And so that made it so that I had to spend a lot of time kind of at the end trying to figure out, okay, was this paper actually mentioned? Did I use this paper? Did I use this article within my paper? Okay, well, why is it in this? Why didn't I reference it if I did use it? Or why is it not in the in-text citation if I did use it? And so that could be really frustrating and time consuming, and you really just kind of want to avoid that. So if you keep a running list of the references that you have and check in regularly against, your in-text citations, that's going to help you a lot in the long run. Something else that's going to happen or help you a lot in the long run is citation managers. So like EndNote or Mendeley can be really, really, really helpful despite having some pitfalls. The only thing I would suggest about EndNote and Mendeley is that just make sure that you're checking their reference, like the actual citation itself. Because sometimes, APA is very specific about the periods, the commas, where they should be, and all that stuff. So make sure that you're kind of just checking based on APA 7th edition that the citation is actually correct. But, Mendeley and EndNote are awesome because they really help you organize those papers. They help you cite those papers, and they also help you find other papers that are related to the papers that you have in Mendeley or EndNote. So it's super helpful. Love those services a lot. And then finally, you're going to want to keep a copy of your APA 7th edition manual nearby. It is a reference manual, and it is not something that you need to memorize. I don't know anyone who works in research who has the 7th edition 100% memorized. It's not really possible. I mean, it could be for some people, but ultimately it is a reference manual. It's something that is worth the investment of buying, so that you can kind of check in every so often when you have a question. That, or like I was saying earlier, there is a website like Purdue OWL that is amazing. I love Purdue OWL, especially if I don't feel like dredging up my APA manual and like looking through all the pages. All I have to do is go on Google and search Purdue OWL and then kind of go from there. So it's super easy, super helpful. The internet, citation managers, and your APA 7th edition manual are your friend. They are very helpful in these situations. Okay, I see that a couple people have put some stuff in the chat and in the Q&A, so I am going to get to those in just a second. But kind of while I do that, I want to have this screen up on or this slide up on the screen for y'all to look at and just kind of go over Statistics Solutions itself. So Statistics Solutions is a full service dissertation consulting company, and we provide graduate students and professionals with timely editorial support for their dissertation and scholarly project. So we do help with APA editing, but we also help with, chapter 1. If you send us a draft, we can help with, topic development, your literature review, kind of getting that squared away, helping to find references, helping to edit your literature review section. Same with methodology. We can help with that. We also help with, survey uploads and helping you find validated surveys that work best. We do the results section as well. So we, do the full analysis and write up for you, or with you. And then, we have a call with you to explain and make sure that you understand, the results behind your study. And then finally, we also help with chapter 5 as well. We also do PowerPoints in terms of like helping you create PowerPoints for your defense, and we do a defense prep as well. So really, we do everything under the sun when it comes to research. And so if you are interested in using our services, we have 30-minute consultations that are complimentary, aka free, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. If that is something that you are interested in, I have my sales manager's phone number and email up on the screen, and she would be more than happy to talk with y'all about your options and what we can do for you. So I'm going to leave this up on the screen while I answer the questions. And so if you guys do have any, if you do want this information, go ahead and write it down. Okay, first question is in the Q&A. Samuel Wilson asked years AD, BC, BCE, or CE. Should those all be spelled out at once? Or at least once? No. So those are things that are AD, those are widely accepted rules that we always abbreviate AD, BCE, CE, stuff like that. So no, you do not have to spell those out at least once. Those are kind of one of the only exceptions to that rule. Okay. Perfect. Okay. Next question. You don't have to cite your paraphrases is important. So you do have to cite your paraphrases. So even if you're paraphrasing a document, you absolutely have to cite it. Especially if you're paraphrasing a document. Especially if you're paraphrasing something that you copied word for word and you have quotation marks around it, you should absolutely cite it. But even if you are just paraphrasing your document or the article, absolutely cite where you got that information from. It's incredibly important. And then how important is it to have the exact page in the citation? So it depends on the citation itself, right? So if you are looking at a journal publication and specifically, the article that you're talking about within this journal publication is volume 4, pages 6 through 27, right? So then in that case, it would be kind of important. If it's like in a larger volume. However, if that article is literally just a standalone article that's been published on its own, it's not published with a bunch of other articles, you don't need to list the page numbers. It's not that important. But if it's in like a textbook or if it's in like a journal publication where it's with a bunch of other articles, absolutely super important for page numbers. The purpose of citing your research or citing other research is so that other people can back up what you're saying. So if you say something crazy like the sky is purple and then you don't have a citation for it, people are like, where the heck are you getting that information? Because the last time I checked, it's not freaking purple. And so if you say something along the lines then of the sky is blue and here is my source for that, you want it so that that person reading that, maybe they don't believe you. Maybe they actually do think the sky is freaking purple. It's not. But I mean, it could be to someone who's colorblind. And so, having that easily accessible to someone who's reading your paper so that they're easily able to kind of back up what you're saying. And that's really the importance of citations. Yeah. Okay. Next question. Table and figure on the top. How to reference table in a bracket. Yeah. So the table and the figure number is always going to go on top of your tables. And really in terms of referencing it, you're going to talk about, you're going to say something along the lines of like C table X or C figure 1 or C figure 2 or C figure 3 for, whatever that figure is. And then you're just going to give a brief description of it. In terms of like the table of contents, you don't have to put the descriptions that much. You just have to put like table 1, table 2, table 3, table 4, and like hyperlinks to them within the paper. Okay. Awesome. And then I think that's all the questions. I'm looking through the chat real quick. Sorry, y'all. Yeah, I do see that someone asked about, certification for these webinars. We do not provide certification for our webinars at this time. So we cannot provide something like that. Other than that, I think that's kind of all the questions I see. I'm going to leave, this up on the screen for a couple more seconds. Well, probably like a minute or two. And, if anyone does have any other questions, like, please feel free to ask before I get off. But yeah, absolutely. Other than that, thank you everyone for coming. Really appreciate all these really insightful and interesting questions. I love when people interact with the webinars and I really appreciate it. So I hope everyone has a great rest of their day. And we do these webinars all the time. So if if you are interested in other aspects of the research process, we probably have a webinar on that as well. So keep an eye out for other webinars that we do if you are interested. And yeah, I hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Okay, y'all, I stopped the screen share. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop the rest of the presentation or the Zoom call. Like I said, have a great day, everyone. Thank you so much for being interactive and asking questions. I really, really, really appreciate it. Yeah, where will you be able to access the presentation? I do believe it does get sent to your email. So you should get an email link to the recording for this presentation. Ah, see, there we go. Sierra is saying it in the chat. She's the best. Awesome. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and end this. Thanks, everyone. Like I said, hope you have a great day.